day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Virtual Clinical Trials, Unifying Trials from Patient Engagement Through Study Closeout. My name is Sonia Hunt, and it's my pleasure to be your X Talks moderator for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. Now, this chat box is located in the control panel, and that's found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require assistance, please contact me at any time by sending me a message using that chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available to you for future streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank EvidentIQ, who developed the content for this presentation. EvidentIQ is a next-generation technology amplified data science group championing the new standards in value creation and innovation-driven relevance for customers. The EvidentIQ offering brings a pioneering end-to-end e-clinical solution that meets increasing customer demand across clinical operations and clinical data management needs with a suite of applications within a single integrated cloud platform. By combining its platform with a broad data science service portfolio, such as patient recruitment, patient engagement, media, and a host of RWE late-phase solutions, EvidentIQ significantly helps customers optimize HTA submissions, pricing, and reimbursement needs. EvidentIQ supports 15 of the top 20 pharma companies through novel RWE solutions and 150 plus SMB customers in over 20 countries, including US, Germany, France, UK, Italy, Japan, and China. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to your speakers for today's webinar. And first, I'd like to introduce you to Andreas Weber. He is the CEO of EvidentIQ Group. With a strong background in strategy consulting, Andreas has been supporting the life sciences industry for more than 20 years. He looks back on a career with the top management positions at ERT, BioClinica, and Oracle Health Sciences. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to your second speaker, and he is Simon Taylor. He is the head of solution consulting at EvidentIQ, focusing on demonstrating the unified suite to prospects and customers alike. His background is across the e-clinical spectrum, including clinical operations and data management. Simon started his career in regulatory affairs before bridging into the world of software. Now it's my pleasure to pass over the mic to our first speaker, Andreas. So Andreas, when you're ready, you may begin.
Many thanks for the intro, Sonia, and a warm welcome to everyone for joining our webinar today. Next slide, please, Simon. So today we're talking about virtual trials. And as most of you will be probably aware, virtual trials have been a buzzword that is around already for many years in our industry. However, COVID-19 has been actually acting as a catalyst to bring the idea of running trials in a virtual mode even further over the last 1.5 years. When we're looking at a survey that our friends from Global Data have been conducted recently, we can actually see the areas in the pharmaceutical industry that have been impacted most by the COVID-19 pandemic. And as everybody probably can guess, the drug development area has been affected most. Next slide, please. Now, how did actually pharma companies and biotech companies react to the pandemic according to the survey from Global Data? Well, the good news is that only 7% have actually ceased opening any new clinical trials. And also only a small portion, 9%, have stopped screening or enrolling patients for clinical trials. The vast majority of pharmaceutical and biotech companies have reacted in a different way. They've been actually looking at what parts of their clinical trials can be actually run in a virtual mode. The first point you will see there is about remote patient monitoring. So about 17% of the audience have decided that going forward, they will actually try to provide remote monitoring to patients. A lot of companies, also 15%, have been planning to move to decentralization or virtual clinical trials for future trials. And also quite a big portion of 14% have actually looked at remote site initiation visits for clinical trials. Some of them, 13%, have actually mandated their research staff to work remotely. And I think what's also very important is that a big portion, 11%, are also looking at direct-to-patient drug delivery, meaning in the course of clinical trials, the drugs will be shipped directly to the patients. Next slide, please. So what is it actually that makes up to a virtual trial? In our view, a virtual trial has about 11 distinct elements, and I will run through them one by one. The first is actually patient recruitment. That means how can we recruit patients in a virtual fashion without any physical interaction with a physician or with a nurse. The second element is eCOA. eCOA is obviously around already in the industry as a mean to collect data from patients for quite a while. But in the course of the pandemic, and also with a view on virtual trials, the need for eCOA has actually increased. What has also increased is the integration of data from wearables technology. That data actually needs to be integrated with other data that is collected directly from patients, such as the eCOA data. And we mentioned already remote patient monitoring, which also constitutes a very important element of a virtual trial. In that fashion, basically a patient would not come to a site, but all the monitoring activities would be conducted remotely. In order to do so, a smart informed consent is required. So eConsent is basically another area that plays a big role in the context of virtual trials. When I'm talking about smart informed consent, I mean actually a way that a patient can actually talk to a physician. The patient can watch videos, can be given a presentation, and at the same time, when the presentation has been completed, when the discussions with the physician have been completed, the patient can sign and give his or her consent to participate in the clinical study. That all is obviously only possible via an online study platform. And online study platforms are playing a big role in that context as well. So does predictive analytics. Predictive analytics is another element which actually constitutes a main puzzle piece of the virtual trial approach. So does endpoint validation. And the last three are a little bit elements that are actually going even one step further. There are quite efficient home nurses networks in the industry right now. And the trick is really to make use of them, but also to connect them again to the online study platforms so that the data can be actually all collected and analyzed in a central place. Teleclinics are also an area which actually have advanced quite rapidly over the last 2 years, I would say. And teleclinics are playing an important role in any virtual trial. And then last but not least, as we could also see in the data that I've been showing from the Global Data Survey, direct-to-patient shipment is also an important part. So that means that the patient doesn't need to come to the site to pick up the doses of drug for the clinical trial anymore, but these doses are getting shipped directly to the patient's home. Next slide, please. So when we're looking now at the benefits and challenges of virtual trials, I would like to first of all to talk about the benefits. It is very obvious that virtual trials have the potential to reduce patient dropout rates. And there are already some studies about it, and dropout rates could actually go down by 50 to 60% from what I've seen. Real-time data collection is another important benefit of running a trial in a virtual way. As I mentioned before, when we were looking at all the elements or building blocks of a virtual trial, then we have been discussing that in a central online platform is actually the key element. And that also enables actually data to be processed and analyzed in a real-time fashion. With virtual trials, we can also establish a greater patient reach. If you think about specifically some indications like rare diseases, where patient populations are sparse and they are pretty much distributed across different geographies, it's actually so much easier in a virtual fashion to reach those patients. With that comes obviously lower site visit costs because patients don't come to sites anymore. Adverse events can be analyzed and reported also in real time due to the online patient platform where all data comes together. And that also leads to an enhanced retention rate for patient and to increase patient engagement. Because in a virtual trial scenario, everybody involved in the virtual trial is so much closer to the patient. A lot of effort goes actually into patient engagement and to come up with different means to engage the patients more efficiently. But we shouldn't forget also the challenges that come with virtual trials. So in essence, not every protocol allows for virtualization. I don't know if you looked recently into clinicaltrials.gov, because there you would see that currently, globally, the world is running about 366,000 trials concurrently. I'm personally aware of a maximum of 10 trials that have been conducted in a truly virtual fashion, meaning fully virtually. Amongst those was one from Sanofi and I believe 2 from Novartis. So if you're thinking about some indications where, for example, ACT is required, that simply cannot be conducted fully virtually. The patients will be still required to come to the site. Another challenge is actually can actually come via the devices that are used in a virtual trial. The loss or the mishandling or even the failure of devices may actually corrupt results. We also need to think about the environment where then a clinical trial is conducted. Usually it's conducted at the patient's home, and that is an unsterile environment. So results may actually differ if they would be compared to a sterile environment at a site. And then also we need to think about the patients themselves. Some of the patient population might not like or not be able to work the technology, meaning to work with different devices, with handheld devices, with mobile phones, and with different applications. And finally, I would also like to mention that finding the right technology and data collection partners can be a challenge, but that part is very, very important for the success of any virtual trial. Next slide, please. So finally, I've actually got some considerations for you. First of all, as we said before, fully virtual trials are still rare. And when we're looking at different market studies, it is expected that those trials remain limited to actually quite a narrow set of use cases, such as well-characterized drugs with a few adverse events in a mild indication, with endpoints that are suited to remote measurement. However, with an adoption rate of more than 80% in smaller early phase and post-approval studies, the hybrid model running a trial partly virtual and partly in a traditional mode with site visits is actually growing gradually. And it's also growing gradually towards larger pivotal trials. We also believe it is pivotal to determine already in the study planning phase which elements of the clinical trial can be conducted in a virtual mode and which ones not. And that is important even before the protocol gets finalized. We at EvidentIQ, we are supporting our customers actually with endpoint optimization activities, where we can also look at the protocol or the protocol that is still in the works in a way to really come up with an approach and advise which elements can or should be conducted in a virtual fashion and which ones not. And very lastly, I would like to advise also that the success of completing even a hybrid trial very often depends on establishing efficient partnerships with technology companies and also with CROs. With that, I'm coming to the end of the first portion of this presentation, and I would like to hand over to Sonia to do the first poll.
Well, thank you very much, Andreas, for that for your portion of the webinar presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I'm now going to launch our poll question, and this is our first poll question. And audience members, you'll see it take over your screen. This is done in real time, so your participation is strongly encouraged and very much appreciated. And it's a very simple question. And the question is, how many vendors do you use for your clinical technology portfolio? So we have a couple of options. We have 1 to 2, 3 to 5, 5 to 10, or 10 plus. I'll give you a few more seconds to complete this poll question, and then once I close the polls, I'll share the results with you, and then I'll hand it over to Simon to begin his portion of the presentation. Okay, that looks like it's the majority of our audience members have cast their votes. I'm going to leave a few more seconds for those of you who have not. If you could go ahead and do so now, I greatly appreciate that. Okay, that looks like it's most of everyone. Thank you very much for that. I'm now going to close the polls and share the results. Okay, so the question that we had for you was, how many vendors do you use for your clinical technology portfolio? And the results are here. We have 40% using 1 to 2, 33% using 3 to 5, 13% using 5 to 10, and then another 13% using 10 plus. So thank you everyone for participating in our first poll question. Now I'm going to pass over the mic and the controls to Simon. So Simon, when you're ready, you may begin.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you everyone for answering the question. It's always interesting for us to know how many people or how many vendors people are using to conduct their clinical trials today. And there's a good balance between using 1 to 2, but we do hear some, and we do see it regularly from people using more than 10. And none of those answers are a surprise, so we do thank you for doing that. In terms of what I want to talk about today, I really want to talk about 3 themes. So one of them is just the current clinical trial technology landscape and what that looks like, and a couple of issues that we see with it here at Evidentic. I want to do a little case study and a little example of thinking about patient engagement within your tech stack. Particularly when it comes to virtual and hybrid clinical trials, engaging the patient is so important. Making sure, as Andreas said really well actually, how connected they need to be to the trial, making sure devices work properly, making sure it's easy for them to enter their data like side effects or to do things in a sterile environment aren't as obvious as people think. And it's important to think about those things when we're building how a tech stack looks. And I also want to introduce Evidentic as well and just go through the Evidentic way, how we see the world and the way that we do things. So you'll often hear of something like vendor spaghetti and how many vendors there are within the industry. This on the left-hand side is a list of every single bit of technology or service that Evidentic provides across our business. I'm not going to ask a poll question, but in terms of people, I'd love to know for people to think about how many vendors they think this would actually take within their trials at the moment or within their portfolio to conduct every single one of these or even portions of these. And very often, many of these can each be individual vendors. So from e-feasibility, protocol writing, recruitment, EDC, CTMS, eTMF, eCOA, etc. All of those could be one individual vendor combined into what's often called vendor spaghetti, which is a huge map and a huge web of how many vendors and how trying to fit many vendors together can be a little bit of an issue. One of the things we're keen to put across with Evidentic is the breadth of what we do and the breadth of what we're able to accomplish within clinical studies, because we do combine the ability to run online and virtual clinical studies as well, including things like we do, or you can see on the left-hand side, primarily around collecting real-world evidence and using that data linkage, using primary research and recruitment into physical clinical trials as well. And we want to expand that portfolio and that network, but we do go across an enormous breadth of topics. In terms of reducing the number of vendors, there are a number of benefits to doing that. The first, just from a procurement perspective, is much easier to purchase. You're talking through one contract, one set of people to speak to, and very often one agreement in terms of combining or bundling all those technologies. You'll also see consistent pricing models. If you want to go and get 10 different bits of software, you'll often see 10 different bits of or ways of buying that. That is incredibly complicated to do given that you are just one business trying to buy one thing 10 times or 10 things. Very often, the most consistent pricing is the one that wins or the one that is most attractive. There's a lower total cost of ownership, or TCO, because you have a faster adoption of new modules and less training. When you're bringing in new technologies and new tools into your system and into your stack, when they look the same, they feel the same, they're built the same, it's much easier for a user, and a casual user in particular, to be able to adopt those new technologies because they've pretty much already been trained on it before. The whole platform approach, and one of the real benefits of it, is things like single sign-ons and one login, being able to only be trained once and have those principles of how the system is designed across multiple systems and multiple tools. And what you get to is a faster user comfort of a new tool. So not from the point of a user being trained, but when a user is on their own and able to conduct whatever work they need to do comfortably, without complaints, without needing to ask someone. And the time it takes for that can often be much longer when you're using multiple bits of software across multiple vendors, because when they go to a new tool, they often go back to the start. So when you're using one vendor, one platform, one set of technology, that user gets that user comfort much faster, because they're starting from a much better starting point, and they're much further along the process in terms of understanding the software they're trying to use. You'll see consistent communication between customer and vendor. You will very often use or be seeing the same customer success team, the same person you know. You've got to understand, they've got to understand your business, and they can help you with that as well. Having someone that understands your users, your power users, and your casual users is incredibly important when it comes to the vendor-customer relationship. It's great to be able to understand a business fully and be able to make the right recommendations to the right people at the right time about software, instead of having to go back to the start with a new vendor and do that all over. The last thing as well is a consistent user experience. And this, we think, or we feel, is critical for virtual trials, particularly for your casual users. And your casual user is someone that doesn't log in particularly often, but their role is still very important. For example, if you're getting a patient to fill in some data online, if you're getting a study nurse or a doctor to fill in data online, they may not be someone that uses your tool day in, day out. They're not a power user. They're someone that needs the user experience to be familiar, it needs to be consistent, and it needs to be easy to use. Otherwise, when you're looking at those sorts of things, the whole thing can fall over quite easily. So it's critical, and we feel it's critical that all the user experience is consistent and it's the same, because the more users you have and the more types of users you have, particularly within a virtual trial, it needs to be as easy for every single one of those to use as it does for the power users. And that's really one thing I'd love people to think about when they go away from this, is actually when you're planning and looking at all of your technologies, or you come to EvidentIQ to talk about it, look at how it all feels for your casual users, not your person that's going to use it day to day or every day, but your casual users and those that aren't using it very often. So just as an example, as I mentioned, patient engagement as part of your clinical platform. So instead of just going through the sort of traditional pillars of clinical technology, looking at patient engagement and understanding patient engagement when you're thinking and planning that. You tend to see, and this is an assumption and a generalization, but you tend to see the two sides of technologies here, where you have one, which is the patient engagement. So things like recruitment tools, patient-reported outcomes and eCOA, consent, and all other tools that engage the patient specifically. They tend to be a very different pillar from the ClinOps and data management side. So the typical clinical technologies like your EDC, CTMS, and your eTMF. Very often, particularly in what we see, and the customers that come to EvidentIQ, almost always, these two sides of the house are very, very disconnected. Very often because one might be a commercial team or market affairs, the other is traditionally ClinOps. One of the things we want to think about and we want to put together is to combine all of this and make sure that we engage everyone at once, we engage everyone at the right time, to make sure that all of these technologies are together. Because when these technologies are connected and they're unified in what we call it, all of this data can flow through very, very smoothly and make a much more powerful experience for your users, or on the other side, when you're actually looking to analyze that data. And there's huge efficiencies that can be gained when these two sides of the spectrum, so the left and the right, are combined into one area and into one single platform or one single place to play. So why does it matter? More virtual or hybrid trials just means there's more opportunity to remotely collect data and bring patients closer to your trial. The longer COVID's gone on, the longer it's changed people's thinking and shifts and how they look at technology. There's just more opportunity. It's going to happen more and more. It's a conversation that will happen more than it's ever had of, do we need to collect data from the patient specifically? Do they need to come into site? Is that something they have to do in person? Or can we get a tool and we can actually do it to them remotely? Particularly when you're looking at populations of patients that can't necessarily move very easily or can't get into a site or maybe very, very unwell and they can just do it themselves from their bed or their home. There are just going to be more opportunities for this, and hopefully, and this conversation does seem to be happening a lot more, particularly as Andreas said. Many previously redundant steps can now be made virtual. Take an informed consent form. Do they necessarily need to be paper anymore? Obviously, there are some countries that still require a hand signature, but is that still something that has to be hand signed? Very often that answer is no, and it's often just because that's the way it's been done and because the person or the people collecting those informed consents have always done it that way. It's not necessarily something that needs to be done on paper, and something that can be done really well, really efficiently, and really easily online. More engagement with patients and more patient-centric tools allow for a higher quality of data that you collect. The more engaged the patient is, the easier it is for them to fill out that data, the better the interface, the better the tool is for them to use, the higher quality of data you're going to get from this out from the other side, I should say. It's much, much easier for a patient to fill in, to explain how they're feeling, to be able to click the right way, fill out a right questionnaire, type in a box, the particular area that they're trying to communicate. It's something that when you think about patient-centric tools, the data is much higher, of a higher quality, I should say, when you are more engaged with patients and tools are more specific to patients, rather than the patient just being on the other end of it. As an example of this, we've just got a reference of this here. When you're looking at things like ePro, this is a pretty typical slide, but when you're looking at things like ePro, you see a much, much higher protocol compliance when you're using eCOA, when you're using ePro, when you're using electronic tools to capture data, as opposed to the compliance with paper, which is 11%. So you get 94% compliance with eCOA and 11% compliance with paper. And that's not to say that people don't want to use paper. It's not to say that they're deliberately not trying to use these tools or not trying to fill out the questionnaires. But we've all seen, or many of us have seen, examples where you have a paper questionnaire for a patient and they filled it out wrongly. For example, if someone's ticked instead of crossed in a box, or someone's tried to cross out one answer and circle the other, or maybe they've done that and actually it was a different answer altogether. Understanding what the patient is trying to communicate there is very, very difficult. And that can lead to some really big errors and some really big misunderstandings and misinterpretations of data. When you're using an electronic system and you stop those errors being able to happen, we do see this 94% compliance with eCOA. So patients, you get a greater compliance, improved compliance to guidance throughout the study, just because it's easier for a patient to understand what they're doing when they're using an electronic system that guides them in a better way. Patient privacy is higher because there are fewer eyes on the source documents, very often because we can reduce those source documents. Data management and stats are happier because the data is cleaner, the database is locked faster. We can automate, or you can have automated VAS measurements, and you can get an immediate status of current data exports. For monitors, the site monitoring load is massively reduced, particularly as Andreas mentioned earlier. There's less travel, there's less need to go into sites, there's less paper usage, and there's better remote visibility to site compliance because they can see it from the system rather than having to go and dig around in files on site to understand the compliance levels at a particular site. For the site themselves, they just have a better quality of data entry because it's direct entry into the system. They can automate scale scoring, lots of fields, lots of types of data entry can be automated. And electronically gathered outcomes, or ClinRows, minimizes the volume of documents that are monitored. Just want to use an example of eConsent as a case study, partly because EvidentIQ are using eConsent as a really big case moving forward, but the ability to enroll into a study or enroll a patient into a study online. Using a simple and user-friendly tool, we can gather the eligibility, we can make sure that the patient understands the risks, they've read or they've viewed any documents, any videos, any PowerPoints, or whatever those materials need to be to make sure the patient understands exactly what they're signing into. You can, as I said, you can review those educational materials, whatever that media is that you need them to review or want to make sure that they've read or seen or understood, so that they are fully informed when they are consenting. And we all know the informed is the most important part. And because of that, we're in a modern world. You can then schedule a medical consultation with a qualified HCP. So you can organize a meeting straight away with a HCP to be able to view this virtually. So a patient can ask a doctor or somebody qualified or any side effects they may be worried about, any risk about the trial. Excuse me. They can schedule that call within the tool or within a particular tool. They can also conduct that call as well. And on the other side, they can even consent to it straight away using e-signatures. So all of that is wrapped up into one tool and into one place. So using the patient as the focal point in the summary of this particular area, there are many systems a patient exists within your study. Consent, ePro, CTMS, and EDC are just particular examples or simple examples. Why not have a patient created once and entered into all of these systems at once? When you have a unified platform, meaning one way of data to flow through the system, it's inherent. Payments can be automated from the CTMS, ECRF scheduling and tracking is automated, and data can be STV'd remotely. You create a patient once and they're in your system forever after. So, Sonia, time for the second poll.
Certainly, I will jump in right now and launch the second poll. Just like we did with the first one, it was done in real time, so your participation is strongly encouraged and very much appreciated. I'll give you a few seconds to do this poll, 20 seconds or so, since it's a simple question. And the question is, would you like to use fewer vendors in your process? So you have either yes or no to choose from. So please go ahead now and select. Okay, that looks like it's the majority of our members. We still have a few people there who have not voted, so if you can go ahead and cast your votes, and then I will close the polls and share the results with everyone, and then we'll go right back to Simon. Okay, that looks like the majority of everyone. Thank you so much. I'm now going to close the polls and share the results. Okay, so let's take a look at the results. The question was, would you like to use fewer vendors in your process? And the results are here. We have 90% saying yes and only 10% saying no. So thank you everyone for participating in poll number 2. Now back to you, Simon.
Thank you, Sonia. I was hoping, obviously, everyone would give those answers. Thank you very much, as obviously I want to talk about reducing that. And for the final part of my talk, before we go back to the Q&A, I want to talk about what we call the EvidentIQ way and just who are EvidentIQ, what do we do, and what are we about. So for us, we have over 100 employees across, we have 24 plus years of industry experience from being around. We work across all types of customer, from pharma, biotech, med device, CROs, as well as non-commercial. We've run and we've used, or we've worked within over 3,500 studies, 2.5 million subjects across 83 countries. We've worked across the breadth of clinical trials. And by that, I do mean across patient engagement, across real world evidence, as well as the clinical side. We don't just do one, we do both. We've successfully submitted over 90 studies to the FDA and EMA as well. All of that is combined within the EvidentIQ group and the EvidentIQ brand. As you'd expect, and as I mentioned, we have a worldwide presence. I won't spend long on this slide. We're headquartered in Munich in Germany, but our presence is global. And we have some real strong bases across France, Germany, the States, Japan, and many others. As I showed in this slide earlier, this is a slide we use internally just to show you the advantage and show you the typical types of products that people may or may not think about. And as I mentioned, the EvidentIQ, we do both of this. We do the products and services, as well as the online patient studies on the left-hand side. They're often split, or they're used to separate vendors, but we want to do that together. All of these slides and the recording will be afterwards, so you can look at this slide in more detail if you wish to look at what we do. But I just want you to understand and want to put across the message that we do cover the clinical development of value change from end to end, which has huge cost and time advantages. So why work with us? For one, patient access. We are partly a digital CRO with a direct access to over 400,000 patients and caregivers, allowing quick turnaround, cost-effective and efficient patient recruitment and engagement. And there's no bias in the data collection. All of our patients are independent. They are just patients. They're not part of a particular site or group. So there's no bias in the data they're collecting or submitting. Geographical reach, we can reach people in pretty much every geography we need to, particularly strong across North America, Western Europe, LATAM, Asia, etc. And we do have a lot of regulatory experience to support big geographical studies which do go across borders. Expertise in real-world evidence design, so able to design those RWE studies effectively for you to make them cost-effective, time-effective, and make sure the quality of the data is at its highest. Of course, we're also a data sciences company, so we have our own tools designed to support our projects. Those, of course, we can license outwards or we use internally, and we do have our own in-house IT team able to develop, adapt, and monitor clinical studies, your own clinical studies or our own studies as we're going across. And everything, as number 5, is consolidated on one platform. So everything we do sits in one area, it's one platform, it's one set of data, which has huge benefits across the enterprise. The benefits across that enterprise then, you get consistent and timely study return on investment and patient return on investment. It's definitely the most cost-effective way to be able to do that. The ROI that you see is consistent and it is timely. It generally tends to be quicker than anything else. Eliminate paper from all aspects of your trial is something we want to get rid of completely as much as we can. Reduce the site monitoring burden. There's, for example, getting rid of source document validation or reducing source document validation anyway. And as well as that, increase patient compliance and increase data quality with intuitive, easy to use and compliant data capture technology. As I mentioned earlier, the intuitive and the easy to use is so important when we're looking at patient compliance and getting good quality data out of them. If it's not easy to use, the patients may do it wrong, and of course that is an issue in itself, and it really comes down to the experts to be able to understand that properly. So just before we go to the last poll and the Q&A, plan your technology ecosystem with patient engagement in mind. How are you engaging those patients? What does the technology you use look like? Do you use any services for that? And can that be combined with other technologies or one vendor that you're using, for example, EvidentIQ? Engage with a vendor that does this as standard. Within EvidentIQ, this is just part of what we do. It's not an additional service, it's not extra, it's just part of us and our business. So it's inherent in our thinking and inherent in our way of working. The platform approach has massive benefits from, as I mentioned earlier, cost, time, compliance, data quality, ease of use, ease of training, ease of onboarding new people. It has such massive benefits when you think from a platform perspective rather than just a single modular perspective. What aspects of your trial can be made virtual? It's always a good thought to have. Does this need to be done the way it's always been done? Or can we use a tool? Is there a different way of doing that? Can it be done more virtually? Can we do this online? Is that something we need to do in the old way? Or can we actually do it in a different way? And the last thing as well is to embrace it. Things are going back to normal, or at least normal in inverted commas. But the hybrid approach, we believe, is here to stay. And the virtual approach is also here to stay. It will happen more and more. It will be more regular. It will become, and it is becoming, way more of a part of clinical trials anyway. So embrace it, think about it, and speak to a vendor who understands that. And with that, just time for the final poll question.
Thank you very much, Simon, for that very insightful presentation. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And just like Simon says, we are now going to, before we start the Q&A, we're going to do our final poll question. And so I'm going to launch that now. And here it is in front of you. And there we go. So the question that we have for you today for our final poll question is, have you ever thought of using a single vendor for all patient engagement through to clinical trials and data management? So please go ahead and choose from the below. I'll give you 30 seconds to complete this poll question, and then we will begin the Q&A portion of the webinar. So please go ahead and cast your vote. Okay, that looks like it's a majority of our audience members. Okay, now I'm going to close the polls and share the results. Okay, so the question again was, have you thought about using a single vendor for patient engagement through a clinical trial and data management? And the question, options were yes or no. And the results are here. We have 65% saying yes and only 35% saying no. So thank you everyone for participating in our last poll question. Now we're going to begin the Q&A portion of the webinar. And for that, we'll put on our webcam. So I'll invite Simon and Andreas to put on their webcams, and we'll begin the Q&A portion of the webinar. Now, hello, there you are. Now, just to remind the audience members, can you please send through your questions using that window, questions window, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the time that we have together. I received a bunch of questions while Simon and Andreas were presenting, so I'm going to start with those. So Andreas and Simon, are you ready for your first question?
Sure.
Okay, all right, so here's the first question. This audience member is asking, do you see any need to collect RWE data in clinical trials? Who would like to answer that one?
Yeah, I can answer that probably. It's a very good question because obviously RWE data collection was mainly linked to market access in the past and also for observational purposes for post-marketing studies. I believe that has changed quite a lot because the FDA has actually issued in the course of the second half of last year and also this year quite a few guidances that are actually encouraging pharmaceutical and biotech companies to collect RWE data already in the clinical trial phases 1, 2, and 3. There are obviously by now also quite a few clinical trials that have been approved by the FDA on the basis of RWE data. And in my view, that will actually be a process that will increase going forward over the next months and also years. I think there will be even more FDA guidances quite soon. I believe also on the other hand side that the pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies, so the industry, will actually recognize the benefit of collecting such data already in the clinical space because it will actually make approvals going forward so much easier.
Okay, thank you very much, Andreas. Simon, did you want to add anything to that answer, or he did it all?
No, Andreas did it all.
Okay. All right, no problem. Let's go on to our second question. Now, this audience member is asking, what should you watch out for when selecting a partner for virtual trials? Who would like to take that one?
I can take that too. The next one is going to be for Simon for sure. I believe, as I indicated a little bit in my presentation, selecting a good partner is actually very important for the success of any trial. And when it comes to looking at ways to virtualize certain elements of a trial and maybe run the trial in a hybrid mode, then that becomes even more important. Because at the end of the day, it's not only about collecting a bunch of technology that might support virtualization of different elements once a protocol is written. I believe it starts much, much earlier in the process. I believe in the planning phase of a clinical trial, it is important to have really a good look at the protocol and how to construct and how to write the protocol and have already in mind which elements of the trial can be virtualized and which ones not. And I think for that one, it's important basically to have a partner, something that Simon was referring to in his presentation, a partner that can already come in and provide that advice and guidance at this early stage of the planning of the clinical trial. And then obviously that partner that has advised to virtualize certain elements can then, when the protocol has been written, the FPE date has been set, also support with the right technology and right services, because then it all comes out of one hand and really is linked together. And I believe that is actually very important when looking at partners.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Andreas. Simon, did you want to add anything to that?
I need to reinforce the expertise is, I think, virtual trials may seem new to lots of people, but to quite a lot of people out there, they aren't new and they've been going around for a while. So people that understood that already are the best people to go with.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Andreas. Okay, here's our next question. The next question we have is, what is the patient's view on virtual trials? This audience member is asking. That's an interesting one.
I'll take this one just so Andreas doesn't have to keep talking. I think in general, patients are happy with it because they're more connected to the trial. Patients very often could feel left out and feel like they're something to collect data from, as it were. They're a body that someone else is collecting data to put into the trial. And when they're actually able to put their own information in and to do it themselves, I think they feel a little bit less of a spare part and actually more connected and just a little bit more human, because I think sometimes that can be lost.
That's a very good point there, Simon. Yeah, thank you for answering that. Here's our next question. This audience member is asking, how do RWE and classical ClinOps technology actually connect? Are they completely separate? Who would like to try that? Who would like to start first?
Simon, you want to go first?
What does Simon say?
What do I say? Simon says, I think traditionally they've always been that way because technology has been built that way to keep them separate. That partly comes down to how you build your systems and how your systems talk to each other. Really changes how that works. And just because it was always done away where you had the patient side and you had the clinical side, doesn't mean that that always needs to be the case. When the two connect together, if you have powerful analytical tools on your clinical side, there's no reason you shouldn't be using your RWE data to analyze that. People just didn't. And when you just think about it differently, actually they connect in a lot more places than people would think. So once you've engaged a patient, they're, as one of my slides said, they can be captured in lots of different places. Just because they weren't previously doesn't mean that they shouldn't. And it really is something I would encourage people to think about.
Okay, thank you very much.
I would probably add to that as well. I mean, that comes a little bit back to the first question we've been discussing, right, about the collection of RWE data. I believe the collection of RWE data will become much, much more important in the clinical space going forward as well, as I mentioned, because there are these new guidances from the FDA. And I believe our real-world data will become very, very important, addressing actually secondary endpoints in clinical protocols going forward. And I believe also the industries are, gradually actually recognizing that fact as well. Because traditionally, if an endpoint needs to be addressed in a protocol, instead of being a primary or secondary endpoint, with patient data, we are usually talking about eCOA data, so classical ePro data, where a patient gets sent a questionnaire on eDiary and fills in some information. But I think that can be actually enriched also with real-world data. From really different sources. And the way at EvidentIQ we are looking at real-world data is it can come from different sources. I mean, you have the classical electronic health records where you can actually get some useful insight for your clinical trials as well. But the way we are doing it at EvidentIQ is actually we are approaching our patients directly to collect this real-world data, also in a clinical trial environment. We're having a patient platform with more than 500,000 patients, or in many different countries in Europe, but also the United States. And I think the combination of collecting that data with a classical eCOA/ePro approach will actually benefit clinical trials going forward and make approvals easier.
Okay, thank you very much. Check your chat box there. Here's our next question. This audience member is asking, do you just recommend either virtual or completely in-person trials? Who would like to start with that one?
Yeah, it's an easier one for me. I think we would encourage both and a hybrid if that's possible. You can never just choose one or the other, but the world is just not built that way. But to do both, particularly at least combine them, I think will happen more and more.
Okay, here's a very interesting question that has come from one of our audience members, and they're asking, not everyone has access to technology. Would a completely paperless effort exclude members of underserved low-income populations? Who would like to answer this one?
Yeah, I can take that one. I would think, first of all, it comes back a little bit to what we've been discussing before. Full virtualization of trials will take a while. I don't see that this will be the new trend, at least in the next 1 or 2 years. Right? We've been talking a lot about hybrid trials, and hybrid trials can also mean that there's still a paper element in there. And in fact, if I'm looking at our company at EvidentIQ, there are still a number of trials where we're providing our customers with double data entry capabilities, meaning that a lot of the data is actually captured electronically, but there's still a small portion of paper where we just can't get around it. And I believe that is probably a trend which will still be in existence for quite a while. And I hope that's actually addressing this question.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it did. Thank you very much, Andreas and Simon. Well, thank you very much for those questions. We have reached the end of the question and answer portion of the webinar. If we couldn't attend to your questions, the team at EvidentIQ Group may follow up with you after this presentation. Now, if you have any further questions, please direct them to the email addresses that are on your screen. And you see there's one there for Simon, and then there's a EvidentIQ-news@evidentic.com. Also is an option you can use. So please go ahead and utilize that. Now, thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen, and your participation is very much appreciated, as it will help us to improve on our further webinars. Now, in a few seconds, I'm going to send you a link in your chat box, and you'll be able to view the recording of this event with that link, and also share that link with your colleagues once they register for the recording as well. So I encourage you to do that. Now, please join me in thanking our speakers, Simon and Andreas, for that very insightful presentation and for answering your questions. So thank you again, Simon and Andreas.
Thanks, Sonia.
Thank you, Sonia. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Andreas, did you have any last words that you wanted to share with the audience? Any takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, it was a great discussion today, and I think we have been looking at the world of virtual trials from many different aspects. I believe the most important aspect is still the patient, and I think the patient will actually drive also further development. We've been discussing that in some ways our virtual trials can make the life of a patient easier, but then on the other hand side, there are also patients in, let me say, severe indications who actually like to still go to a site and to talk to somebody, maybe not even to the physician, but maybe to a nurse. And I think those elements we need to keep in mind. So there will be a lot to come around virtual trials. There will be a lot of new developments going forward over the next 1 or 2 years. But let's keep those things in mind, or let's think about forming the right partnerships. And yeah, I wish you all then the best with your trials going forward.
Thank you very much, Andreas, and thank you again, Simon, for that very insightful presentation. We hope you found this webinar informative. It has been my pleasure to be your webinar moderator. On behalf of the team here at XTalks, we thank you for joining us. Until next time, please take care, and bye for now. I'm Sonia Hunt. Bye. Thank you very much, Simon, Andreas. Thank you.
All.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.